Jag släpper in när ni är redo.
Men vi är redo, tror jag.
Bra, då släpper.
All right. Hello, CSW, and welcome everyone to this event. So in Stockholm right now, it's 11 o'clock, so we're going to start the event. I'm not going to guess what the time is wherever you are, but right here it's 11 o'clock, which is when we are going to start our event. So welcome everyone to the side event, a democratic framework for implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, the example of Stockholm. So in 2018, the city of Stockholm established a local advisory board on the 2030 agenda, directly placed under the board of the municipality. The board consists of representatives from all political parties, as well as researchers and experts from civil society organizations. The mission of the board is, among other things, to regularly review political plans and strategies and make statements on what the city should do to reach the sustainability goals faster. In this event, we will learn more about how Stockholm has organized its implementation of the 2030 agenda and how the city has worked to mainstream gender equality and women's rights into all its sustainability efforts. The event is organized by the City of Stockholm in cooperation with the Swedish Women's Lobby, which is an independent umbrella organization for the women's movement in Sweden. And my name is Clara Berglund, and I am the Secretary General of the Swedish Women's Lobby, and I will be moderating this event. But I'm not alone. I have 4 excellent speakers with me. So in due time, you will get to listen to the Vice Mayor of Stockholm, Katarina Lur, the chair of Stockholm's 2030 Agenda Advisory Board, Gustav Fridolin, senior gender equality expert and also member of the 2030 board, Gertrud Åström, and finally Helena Klintström, who is in charge of urban sustainability at the company WSP and also member of the 2030 board. And next you will get to listen to some introductory statements and short questions from all speakers. And after that, we will have a discussion together. And at that time, we will make room for questions and comments from the audience. You can write your questions in the chat already earlier, but we will save the questions for the end of the event. And please, if you can, keep your microphones on mute at all times. You are welcome to have your camera on if you like, but be aware that we are recording this event. So bear in mind that if you have your camera on, you will also be visible in the recording. And also a suggestion might be, so we are using the meeting function in Zoom. So if you want, a suggestion would be to use the speaker view in Zoom when watching this, and you can change the views in the upper right corner and choose the speaker view. So those were some quick house rules, and I think now that we are ready to start our conversation. So let me introduce our first speaker. Katarina Lur, she is the Vice Mayor of Stockholm, and she is responsible for environment and climate issues since 2014. And she is also responsible for human rights and gender equality. And she is from the Green Party. Welcome, Katarina. Are you with us?
Yes, thank you very much, Clara.
And you are going to talk a bit about Stockholm's work on the 2030 agenda. But first, as a vice mayor, I wonder if you would like to say a few words about what maybe right now is the biggest challenge to sustainable, peaceful and inclusive societies in Europe. And I'm talking about the war in Ukraine that is on everyone's minds right now. So if you want to give a few thoughts about that situation, and also maybe a short introduction to Stockholm.
Yes, thank you very much, Clara. First of all, of course, I would like to express my deepest concern for the people in Ukraine, women, children, and everyone suffering right now from the unprovoked acts of war from Russia. I really hope that the international community can get together and together with Ukraine negotiate a peace agreement as soon as possible. I know that all our thoughts are with the Ukraine people right now. With that said, I would also like to say a few words about Stockholm. As you heard, I'm the Vice Mayor for Environment and Climate in the city of Stockholm, and this is a city that spreads across the archipelago of 14 islands located just by the Baltic Sea, between Finland, Norway, and Denmark. Stockholm is the capital and most populated city in Sweden with nearly 1 million inhabitants. As one of Europe's fastest growing metropolitan regions with an international and an innovative business community, Stockholm drives growth for Sweden as a whole. But Stockholm continuously ranks among some of the most sustainable, smart, and innovative cities of the world. And Stockholm also became the first European green city in 2010. Politically, in Stockholm, we strive to increase the quality of life for all inhabitants and to be an even more resilient, tolerant, and inclusive city where all the people of Stockholm can experience both freedom and safety, which is also an important part of the Agenda 2030. So that was a little bit about Stockholm.
Thank you, Katarina. And for those of you that are not in Stockholm right now, I can tell you that the sun is shining, a few clouds on the sky. I think that with that said, Katarina, if you would like to give us a short presentation about the political commitment that you have and the city has taken on the implementation of the 2030 agenda. So please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, the pandemic and now the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Ukraine have ravaged some of the fabric that is global collaboration, but it has also shown just how much of our challenges that are intertwined and how much we can achieve if we work together. We learn how climate change, as well as challenges to biodiversity conservation and human rights, all affect our way of life, and how challenges become global threats and how international trends can have a local impact. However, there is still time, and I truly believe that we, because of the SDGs, have a better opportunity to identify mutual challenges and the solutions to these challenges. Stockholm's ambition is to take a leading role in implementing the 2030 agenda and the SDGs at the local level, a decision that has affected both ways of thinking and ways of collaborating in the city of Stockholm. The work with Agenda 2030 makes it easier for us to establish a common framework, also with other agents for change, such as businesses, civil society organizations, national agencies, and academia. We need to work closely together with businesses and civil society organizations to ensure that we learn from each other, while we also reinforce each other's strengths. CSOs have a direct connections to our citizens, while businesses often are the first to innovate and try new and sustainable solutions. So why did we want to build a new organization around the Agenda 2030 in the city of Stockholm? First of all, it was clear that we needed a more structured work with all the SDGs, not just some of them. To do that, we also needed to link together the work with different SDGs instead of working with them separately. We also wanted to increase the knowledge of the agenda through all our own municipality departments that then could spread them to other stakeholders. So a clear example of this is that we have established a council for the Agenda 2030 in the city of Stockholm. The council should provide advice and support on measures driving the implementation of the global goals. It consists of 17 members representing all political parties on the municipality council, and also experts from the civil society, the business community, and academia. Thus, The council consists of a variety of members from different parts of society to bring a holistic perspective and provide the expertise needed to implement the agenda. The council exposes political parties to expertise and cutting-edge knowledge and involve all of them in decision-making on sustainable development, securing broad political support for the decisions. But there are also other advantages with the council structure. In order to get necessary knowledge in-house, we integrate external stakeholders to the regular decision-making process and increase the efficiency of the city's work with sustainable development and the SDGs. At the same time, we secure third-party feedback, involve relevant stakeholders, external perspective, and also constructive critique for the city, since the experts are independent and not employed by the city. I believe that the council, because of its composition of both experts and politicians, is regarded as a credible instance for its recommendations. We also encourage our own operations to work more holistic and innovative. Agenda 2030 has challenged the city's traditional structure and organization. A great transformation has been initiated in order to address all the goals. That is why we created a new network-based organization. Each one of the 17 goals has been assigned to the city's different departments. We have assigned at least one responsible department per SDG. For example, SDG number 3, good health and well-being, belongs to the Division of Social Affairs and the Department of Sports. And number 15, life on land, is where the Department of Environment is the one main responsible. But we also have more transversal SDGs like gender equality, reduced inequalities, and social inclusion and climate action, which is coordinated by the Central City Executive Office. However, there is a strong directive to the responsible for each goal to build new networks with the other departments around each goal with an aim to build a spider web structure, including and connecting each goal. We believe that the structure is creating ownership and synergies between different stakeholders in the city, concretizing the work at the local level and making it more tangible for the citizens, also creating better opportunities for collaboration with external actors. Finally, the work is followed up through a local framework where the SDGs are integrated in the city's vision for 2040 and integrated to the city's regular follow-up model in the budget. However, choosing relevant indicators and tools to assess progress was never an easy task. The results are also reported in the city's sustainability report and in a shorter version in English in a voluntary local review. So, what have the report shown us? In our first follow-up report, it pointed out both strengths and weaknesses. I started by saying that Stockholm became the first European green city, and we have been working with environmental programs in the city for 50 years now, after adopting our first program after the first UN conference on environment in Stockholm in 1972. This shows in the reporting. One example is that we have reduced emissions of CO2 with 70% per capita since 1990, which is an important milestone for SDG 13, Stop Climate Change. So this is, of course, the foundation for a city that truly builds its operation upon all three dimensions of sustainability: social, environmental, and economic. However, our follow-up framework also points out that we do not yet reach all our goals. Important work is now ongoing in order to reduce inequality between groups and in areas of work, education, health, and exposure to violence, as well as an increased work to adopt to climate change. As Vice Mayor for the Environment and Climate, I'm determined to work hard so that Stockholm becomes a resilient city of opportunities where no one is left behind. This means that reducing inequality is a necessity for achieving the SDGs. One example to this is our work towards gender equality. Stockholm is a city where the gender pay gap is gradually decreasing. However, it's fundamental to increase women's prospects to have the same opportunities as men to enter the labor market. Our operation must ensure a fair distribution of power, influence, and resources between women, men, girls, and boys. But an intersectional approach is fundamental if you are to become truly resilient. We know, for instance, that women with disabilities have a higher risk of domestic violence and sexual abuse, and we must therefore target our actions to become more inclusive. We must work harder to safeguard girls' and women's human rights, making Stockholm a city where you are free from violence, regardless of gender. So I think this can showcase the importance of the Agenda 2030 Council that brings together experts from so many different levels of society. We are all local parts of the global solution where resilient cities leave no one behind. So I think that is what I would like to say in my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Katarina. I just had one really quick follow-up question for you. You are describing the framework that you have established, which is you have translated the global targets and indicators of Agenda 2030 to the local level, as you described. Could you say something more about those targets and indicators, and maybe specifically how you have included results on different groups of women and men and boys and girls?
Mm-hmm. What we do is that we try to break down the different goals into indicators to see in what direction they are going. And these indicators are going directly into the budget reporting. So each level in the city, when they report on the acts that they do in the budget, they need to report that in the budget, and they need to report the progress with the different indicators from the SDGs. However, I think since we started this work in 2018, I think these indicators are always a problem. We have done the same with the environment program, and we always have to check if the indicators are showing us the right thing. For example, if you show that less people now get money from the government since they need more money, if we have a good progress, is less money is paid to the people, but we don't know if people get less money because they don't need it, or that we get less money to the people that would need the money. So I think there are a lot of challenges to do this in the budget. But I think what we have seen is that since everyone has to report on the actions, people are working much harder with their part of the agenda. And we also see when we publish the sustainability report that everyone in the city gets more information on what the other departments are doing on their goals. So I think we push each other to really increase the speed in working with the agenda.
Thank you. Sounds like a good framework, and then what we can work on is to have that in-depth analysis of the figures, the indicators, and the targets that you collect to find out more. So thank you again, Katarina, and I will turn to our next speaker, Gustav Fridolin. And Gustav is, as I said, the chair of the advisory board or the council on Agenda 2030 in Stockholm. And you also used to be one of two leaders of the Green Party in Sweden and the Minister for Education. And now you have gone back to being a teacher and you work within adult education. And we are so glad that you are with us today, Gustav. And I had mentioned already the advisory board and several times, and I think that now you can tell us a little bit more about what you do and what you have accomplished so far. So how can a scrutinizing political body on the 2030 agenda best be organized locally? So this is what we think that the advisory board or the council in Stockholm is an example of. So please, if you can tell us a little bit more about that and give us a short presentation.
Thank you very much, Clara, and I will also express my gratitude of the possibility to be part of this seminar. Katarina has given you a good overview of Stockholm's work with Agenda 2030. I will maybe repeat some interesting things from that, but also try to give you an in-depth description of how we work in the council or advisory board. But first of all, it's important to see that what Stockholm has expressed is actually that the city should be leading in reaching the goals within Agenda 2030. That of course makes challenges of the indicators, such as Katarina described, but it's also part of a, I would say, positive competition, where the world has set down in which areas should we actually compete, where could competition become good as countries and as regions. And now Stockholm has taken on that challenge and try to not only reach the goals in time, but actually be leading and lead by example. And as described, the organization in the municipality is based on an overall responsibility at the Central City's Executive Office, and all goals handed out to the different agencies, municipality agencies, with specific civil servants assigned responsibility for each goal and target. And the work is evaluated yearly, both by the city in, as Katarina said, the budget and the sustainability report, but also within different UN cooperations with other cities. And this is how a city of Stockholm is handling the goals. I would reckon, and I know that this is similar with other cities that we could compare it. But it also comes with a big challenge. In one way, you could actually argue that it goes directly against the idea of the SDGs. The Agenda 2030 is, by its nature, meant to be holistic and can't really be broken down to bits and pieces if you do not have a clear idea of where the overall work should reach. The idea with Agenda 2030 was to make sure that what you do working to reach one goal does not become counterproductive in the light of another goal. And this means that you need to combine the organization with specific responsibilities handed out to different parts of the city structure with a structure that are assigned to have an overall view and are not limited to one or two specific goals, but have the responsibility to look after them all at once. And that is why in 2018, the then ongoing new leadership of the city, consisting of the center-right parties and the Greens, decided to organize a political body in the shape of a council or advisory board. And I was appointed chair. The board is, as mentioned, quite large. It consists of 17 members. 9 of them are politicians, representing each and all of the parties elected to the city council. There's been some changes over the years, but you can see that the parties has given priority, electing politicians that also serves as vice mayors, leaders of their parties, one mayor for the largest district in Stockholm, Södermalm, and members of the municipality environmental committee. The other 8 members are experts, and I wanted to present them. They were elected after an open invitation to nominate, directed to Stockholm's civil society, the business sectors, and the universities. Over 100 nominations arrived, and a specific committee chose the 8 experts now represented. From civil society, we have 1 member with a background in the basket and athletics federations in sports, Asoka Namaka. We have the chair of Stockholm Society for Nature Conservation, which is Sweden's oldest and largest environment movement, Anders Thornberg, and a member nominated from the disability rights movement, Anna Kvarnström. From the academia, we have Professor Gertrud Åström, that you will listen to later on. Gertrud also used to be engaged in the Swedish Women's Lobby, and Professor Johan Kuylenstierna, head of Stockholm Environment Institute, who also is the chair of the government's advisory board on climate policy. And from the business sector, we have Helena Klintström from the construction company WSP. You will also listen to Helena soon. Some members, as Gertrud, have background in several fields, which is quite interesting. Ahmed Abdirahman, for example, is a founder of a democracy organization that organizes a political festival each year in a vulnerable area, and has also worked at Stockholm Chamber of Commerce. Marika Markowitz is today Dean at the Stockholm Diocese of Church of Sweden, but used to lead the charity organization and large second-hand non-profit company, Stockholm City Mission. The experts have the same formal role and rights in the advisory board as the politicians. And Azuka Namaka is appointed vice chair. And this is important, as the SDGs is impossible for the city to reach only by its own agencies and structures. You need to work together with the whole society, the civil sector, the enterprises, and the research community. The idea of the advisory board is not to take over the responsibility from the elected mayors. We will not make life easier for Katarina Lu and her colleagues, but to support them in reaching the goal. And we hope to have an influence in the city's priorities and actions in 3 phases. Firstly, while we plan our meeting, by doing so, we chose to highlight topics and areas of interest where we think that the city could work even better. By inviting different parts of the cities to come and describe their work to the advisory board, we give strength, hopefully, to the civil servants appointed with responsibility for specific goals and targets. And by making different bosses in the city prepare to give presentation and to be evaluated by the board, we also make them see their work as part of the Agenda 2030 framework and with, so to say, Agenda 2030 glasses. When we ask boss within the city to come and give a presentation to the board, they need to prepare themselves, and they will also get evaluated. And we hope that we, by doing that, make sure that the Agenda 2030 work is higher prioritized within that part of the city. Secondly, within our meetings, it has of course been a challenge during the pandemic, but as chair, I try to lead the large committee in a way that makes sure that the members of the board openly can discuss the situation with different representatives of the city. Our guests to the board has often expressed afterwards that they get support in their work through the remarks of the members of the board. The politicians in the board has been able to leave the political rhetorics outside of our both physical and digital rooms, while actually with their political experience focusing on the task ahead, which has also given more room, of course, for the experts. Usually, a presentation by someone from the city are mirrored by a prepared presentation in the same subject by one of the experts with knowledge and experience close to that field. So we're not limited to discuss only through the experience or through the prepared presentation from the city, but we also have an expert preparing a presentation before the open discussion takes place. Thirdly, the board summarized their advice after the discussion. And for 4 years now, we have managed to find common ground between all parties and all the experts on the issue at hand. For example, we made sure that the city revised a new plan strategy on public procurement to make sure that the city's purchases takes the SDGs into better account. And even though this strategy had been politically discussed before entering our room, the board managed to be very consistent, clear, unanimously between all parties and all the experts. The mayors hasn't, of course, listened to all of our advices, but I think we, in the issues that we have discussed, have played a significant role. Now we have municipality elections coming up in September. And we do not know how the city will choose to organize this work from next year on. But on our next meeting, we will discuss our experiences working this way and give advice also on that.
Thank you, Gustav. By the sounds of it, it sounds like that the advisory board or the council is sort of a watchdog, but a watchdog that has been initiated by the city itself, and that's also given a central position and quite high level, and also multi-stakeholder. Would you say that that's an appropriate description, a high-level multi-stakeholder watchdog?
No, I certainly would, and our power to influence the city does not come from our formal role, even though we are an advisory board directly under the mayors, but it comes from the fact that the parties have prioritized it, and that so many of the organizations within the civil society, like media and the business sector, wanted to be part of the board, so that we have such a high level stakeholder. And that's why you want to listen to what the board says.
Right. And I also had one just follow-up question to you, and that is how the board works to mainstream gender equality and women's rights perspective into all of its work.
We do that mainly by two means. Firstly, by our mission to make sure that we are keeping the eye on the whole of Agenda 2030, and you can't do that without keeping the gender glasses on, both because we have the specific goal, but also because the gender targets is mainstream throughout the goals within Agenda 2030. So that's our role, that's our mission, and if we don't do it, we don't do our work. And secondly, as you hear, a council as us is very dependent on which politicians are elected, but even more which experts are elected. And by making sure that we did elect experts that have an experience and a knowledge in how to mainstream gender issues within their work, it becomes a natural part of our discussion. So I would say that if you have a discussion in the board, that will be part of that discussion, depending on that we have members of the board that make sure that happens. And that's why the selection process becomes so important. If you don't do that properly, you would get a bias where we would miss different goals, and we would not be able to take on the goals that actually need to be mainstreamed throughout every goal.
Thank you. And now we will turn to that very expert, which is our next speaker, Gertrud Åström. So Gertrud is a senior gender equality expert, and she has been instrumental to policy and work for gender equality in Sweden for many years. And she used to be the chair of the Swedish Women's Lobby. And now, as you've heard, she serves on the advisory board on the 2030 agenda in Stockholm, both as an expert, but also with her foot also in the civil society and in the women's movement. And before your presentation, Gertrud, I wondered if you could start by saying something about why gender equality and how it is a precondition for sustainable development, and also specifically the connections that you see between women's rights and the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and the 2030 agenda. Please.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you so much. Well, I think there are a simple answer and a more complex answer. And of course, the simple answer is that you just follow what is already said, because the connection, the need is already expressed in so many different treaties, documents, agreements, etc. So we have a lot of grand policies, and they are great policies. And of course, the Agenda 2030 with the Sustainable Development Goals is one of these policy documents. But the draft agreed conclusions for CSW 66 is also one example of that. It said that this is the case. But we have others that we all know, the Sendai framework, urban agenda, financing of development, quite a lot of very interesting regional agreements. And the Security Council Resolution 1325 and a lot of others. So it is said, and that is simple, just do it then. But the complex answer is how to do it, how to get there, because that is not easy. Because as pointed out both by Katarina and Gustav, we are talking about holistic understandings and issues, and that is never easy. So both sustainable development and gender equality, it involves all parts, all levels of society. So I think that if you ask about the connection between Agenda 2030 and CEDAW, the Convention on the Rights of Women, I think they are like peas and carrots. You don't have the one without the other, or you miss something if you just have one of them. Obvious is that Agenda 2030 needs CEDAW, because that is why we have the specific goal 5 that Katarina talked about, and also that it is a perspective on all the other goals. So that is very clear. Agenda 2030 needs CEDAW. It needs gender equality. It needs to work with women's rights to get its goals. But does CEDAW need Agenda 2030? Is it the other way around? And I think that is what we are working with. Anyway, I am. Will Agenda 2030 deliver a fulfillment of the rights of women and gender equality? That has to be shown. We really don't know, because there are no agreements actually saying that. So, but of course, why should it be easy? It's thrilling to work with it and trying to walk the talk, trying to show how it could be done. So, but why, if I turn to myself and not all the international agreements, so why is the connection so important, and what is actually said about the connection? So I would like to start with democracy and human rights, because that is our basis, our moral basis, our starting point. And I think that democracy and human rights, they are the best things ever invented by human beings. So human rights for women equal to men, not different rights, but equal rights for all human beings, which CEDAW, the Convention on the Rights of Women, is about. It secures human dignity of the individual. And human dignity of the individual is the prerequisite for freedom of oppression. And freedom of oppression is the best opportunity to get a prosperous, peaceful, and sustainable society. And without it, we will not have it. That is my conviction. This is not a new insight. It's a very old insight, really. Already in the 1860s, John Stuart Mill expressed approximately the same thing. He said, well, it's not good for a society if you have to oppress half the population. It costs a lot. Since we are in Stockholm, it's appropriate to mention Birger Jarl, the founder of Stockholm, who in the 13th century introduced peace laws for women. They were adopted then. And what did they say? It said that kidnapping of women, rapes, forced marriages, abuse, threatens the resilience of society. So I think perhaps we should promote Birger Jarl a bit more. Someone asked me, was he a feminist? And well, that's of course, it's an impossible question. Who would know if the word wasn't invented then? But he knew something about what the prerequisites for resilience in a society is, and that is not abusing women. So, but more specifically, if you read the CEDAW, the Convention on the Rights of Women, it's very clear that equal rights for women is about the complex rebirth of humankind as such, or reproduction, as we said in the early 1970s when we started to develop theories on the reproduction in society. And we knew then, we know now that the reproduction of human beings shapes the whole society through laws, distribution of resources, as well as through religions or traditions of cultures, or any way that norms are carried out in our society of how it should be. And gender equality, equal rights for women and men, challenges all these norms. So if you want to secure sustainability, a sustainable development, resilience, you have to secure rebirth without oppression of women. And that is a prerequisite for peaceful societies, a peaceful development, as Katarina mentioned in the beginning concerning the situation we have now in Ukraine. So specifically then, lastly about CEDAW, the Convention on the Rights of Women, it deals as the only UN convention with the human reproduction. No one else is doing that. And the convention is an anti-discriminatory convention. It is based explicitly, and this is a quotation from the convention, on the special role of women in the human procreation. That is what is said, as the starting point for oppression of women in the whole society, control over women, control over childbirth and children, control over new and future generations to come. So the rights of women, gender equality in CEDAW is based on women's biological sex. It's not about identity that we talk a lot is an important issue. We talk a lot about it today. It's not about gender. It's not about feminism. These words were not used. They were not even mentioned in the CEDAW. But the sole role of the convention is to eliminate subordination of women in comparison with men in all society. And that is where the peas and carrots come in, because that is also what the Agenda 30 is heading at. Equal conditions all over the society to get a prosperous development. So I think that understanding the peas and carrots and how we could work together is very fruitful and very interesting to think of. And it's important not only for social issues, even though we work a lot with that, but also for understanding environmental issues and economic issues. So that is my why and how.
Thank you, Gertrud, so much for pointing out those very clear and real interconnections between women's rights and sustainable development. I wonder also if you can say a little bit about your analysis of the work that has been done by the 2030 Agenda Board that has been previously described. What's your impression of the work that's done by the board?
Yeah, well, I thought I have 3 points that I would like to share a few words about. It's about democracy, the practice of democracy. 2, about gender mainstreaming, the practice of gender mainstreaming. And 3, SIDO, the practice of SIDO when working for sustainable development in Stockholm. But first, I would like, as a member, as an external member of the board, to express my gratitude. I would like to say how much I have appreciated the excellent presentations done by the officials, by the heads in different parts of the city, by their experts and all kinds of employees at different levels that we have actually had the opportunity to meet within the advisory board. And I have admired their efforts to present their work, to pose questions to us, and their willingness to listen to what the board has said. And I think their way of dealing with their mission to work together with us has encouraged us to be courageous. We have been able to be open. We are testing thoughts. And I think that is something that Katarina also touched upon. It's a basis for becoming innovative, understanding all the issues in new ways. So thank you to the whole city of Stockholm. So what about democracy and practice of democracy? I think that the advisory board is an example of how to practice deliberative democracy, a dialogue between politicians, officials, and external experts. And there are not so many practical examples of how a city really tries to, in a broad, holistic way, have a deliberative democracy. Democracy is an ongoing dialogue. It is built on the ability to take reason, facts, and knowledge into decision making. And I think that it is important today to stress that we live in a time that promotes extremism in different ways, and extremism is a problem for democracy. Since democracy needs truth, and extremism is built on lies, and we see a lot of results of this now. So our time is in great need of different kinds of reality checks exercised by all of us wherever we are. And I think the advisory board is an example of a peaceful, respectful, listening reality check. Anyway, I think that is what we are trying to do. Well, as Clara said, I feel I am the representative of the civil society and the academia. I would not like to choose. So a few words about that. Often when you talk about the involvement of civil society in different settings, for instance, now within the CSW 66, we often talk as if civil society wants something or needs to be given something, need something. But I think that an important outcome of the advisory board is the insight that it is and should be the other way around. The involvement of civil society is needed by the city of Stockholm. What do we need in the city? How can we talk about it? How can we cooperate? Because we need you. Because what we need, when we really feel this is what we need, that is a very good starting point for change, for processes of innovative thinking, etc. So I think that is a major insight. We are not there because we need it, but we are there because we are needed for a prosperous development. So the second then on gender mainstreaming and practice on gender mainstreaming, I think both Katarina and especially Gustav have already talked very much about that, so I'll be very brief. I think the strength when it comes to gender mainstreaming is that we are not working, perhaps a little, but not merely on these policies, just this policy on a very, very level, but we are talking about strategic frameworks, about plans for activities on what to do. And these are not the plans that is, oh, we have a plan and let's see when that will happen. But these are the plans that the activities in the city are arranged after. That is what we have focused on, how to do things, steering documents, and as stressed out, indicators on factual matters, which is not easy. Hopefully, I think that our work has strengthened real change in municipal activities, leading to real improvements for gender equality. So you might ask, what have I as a gender equality expert been doing? Well, I've been reading, commenting all these kinds of documents. And just to give, I have written about the proportion of human beings and trees in Stockholm, very important, about the proportion of green areas and hard surfaces when it comes to care for elderly people, about smart indicators for assessing results in follow-up of mechanisms, stressing the importance of sex disaggregated data, which you can combine with other types of perspectives. And all of this from the holistic understanding that this is required for a well-being of human beings and a resilient society. That is what we work for. So I already said a lot about CEDAW beforehand and the practice of CEDAW when working for sustainable development in Stockholm. I think that CEDAW deals with factual issues. All of us who have lived with CEDAW since 1979, and I am one of them, we know that the strength in CEDAW is that it is extremely concrete, very factual. You can actually use it, and you can use the platform for action from Beijing in 1995 to get even further information on what to do when it comes to different parts in society and different issues. I think that therefore CEDAW and the work in the advisory board has also stressed the importance of using sex disaggregated data. If you don't have data, you cannot talk about factual issues. You cannot do this reality check. And I think that has been strengthened and perhaps better understood by people working in the city. And I think that we have seen the importance, and so far we have discussed a lot, and I don't think it's strange, because that is what we often do about social sustainability. We are developing understanding of gender equality and the environment, absolutely, and this is done in a very concrete way, not not ideology, but very, very concrete. What I've missed, and I've also put forward in the board, is the clear-cut combination of sustainability and the economy. So I think that is where we have a lot of things to do, but I'm grateful for that. So we still have a mission to take care of. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Gertrud. And I think that we are still waiting for Helena. So I think we will start already at this point with a few questions. And then Helena will give her presentation as soon as she enters. So if you have a question for any of our speakers, you can please write it in the chat and I will ask it to our speakers. But firstly, I thought that if we could perhaps go back to Katarina, and just wanted to hear if you have any initial reflections on what has been said by Gertrud and Gustav.
Well, I think it was really interesting to hear the perspectives from both Gertrud and Gustav. And I think Gertrud put forward some really important facts that the city really needs the board, the experts, and the civil society. And I think sometimes we forget that we have a big need of working together with all civil society organizations in Stockholm. And the board actually initiated a study last year to investigate how the city can work better with the civil society. And I think that could be, that is actually one of the most important things, with this kind of system, that if we take in the experts, they can show us that this is something we really lack right now. So I think that was really important that Gertrud lifted that question.
Thank you. And perhaps we could also say something more about that, but because I know that right now at the CSW, the meaningful participation of an influence of civil society is debated and negotiated right now. So at the CSW this year, they are renegotiating the methods of work and how to have a meaningful participation of women's organizations and girls' organizations and civil society at large is one of those important topics that that is discussed. So I wondered, Katarina, how do you think, why is it that it has been established on the board that Gertrud was described, that civil society organizations feels not only that they need to be there themselves, but that they are needed and listened to, not only invited? Because I know from my experience that often civil society or NGO representatives feels that they are just invited for show and not really listened to. So what do you think, how have you accomplished this environment, and what could other organizations learn from that?
Oh, wow. I'm not really sure if I'm the best person to answer that question, but I think when we started to discuss this council, we already had a strong feeling that we needed other input that could actually give us more information than just one meeting every second year. So we really needed the input from all of those organizations. I know now, when I have read the study from the council, that you see big differences in what kind of civil society organization that is closely knitted to the city's organization already, and what organization feels that they are very far from the organization. And I think that for me was an eye-opener, that some of the organization that we collaborate with, we have been collaborating in the city with those for many, many years. And I don't really think we think about the importance of having those like organizations for women, for women in need, for helping homeless people, for example, while we had very little collaboration with the environmental organizations to see what they have, what kind of input they have. So I think I learned a lot that there are so many things we have to improve, but I think that we need new kind of structures for these organizations and the collaborations, because what the input always have been is that these organizations may need financing, they may need room for their meetings, and we could actually help them a lot, although the people in these organizations wants to, of course, do their own work. So I think there are many things to work on in this regard to actually help each other much more. And if we don't work together, we will both lose money, because I think that we help each other to go forward, but we will also lose a lot of information that we need. And I think it's actually a key to speed up the work, to work much closer together.
Thank you, Katarina. Gustav, do you want to add something about how to create that meaningful participation of civil society organizations?
Well, I feel within the board there are some important things. Firstly, this that I mentioned, that the experts are there on with the same rights as the politicians. The division between politicians and experts is not formalized. It becomes part of the work, and that division becomes that many of the politicians firstly wants to listen to the experts, because they go to other political meetings where they listen to each other and they know about the political differences. That's already known. The unknown is what the experts have to say in different areas, what their experience and knowledge could give them. And when they do contribute, because of course the politicians do contribute in the advisory board as well, they do it with their experience, and that is both their experience as politicians. For example, Christopher, who used to be, as I described, the mayor for the biggest district, he can tell the board, in my district, in that work, we do like this, or we have this challenge. Or they do it in their experience from the fields that they actually work in outside politics. They also in some way become expert, because of course they have been elected by their parties to the advisory board, because they have an interest and a knowledge of the issues that we should work. So Rodrigo, who is representing the left party in the board, he can tell us about his work in one of the big umbrella organizations for foreign development organizations in Sweden. So that creates an atmosphere where I hope that all the experts feels like Gertrud describes, that they're actually needed. Secondly, I think that this method where one of the experts mirror the presentation from the city and has prepared a couple of minutes to give their view on the topic ahead also makes sure that we as members of the board are not only that we become participants in the meeting. You go on so many meetings where you actually only listen to prepared presentation, which can be very interesting. But if you want to hear what members also say, then you need to create a form of meeting where you have as much role as the people coming and giving presentation, even though, as Gertrud say, those presentations has been a very high quality. And I think that idea that we had quite early on in the work, that for the big issues handed on, you should both have one of the heads from the city, but also have a prepared presentation from one of the experts.
Thank you. So I think that you are onto something, describing that how to have a participation of civil society that is actually on equal footing with other participants in the meeting, also politicians, because that's a very unusual, I think, for the kind of meetings that we are invited to. There is usually a very clear hierarchy where civil society representatives get to listen, maybe ask a few questions if they are lucky. So I think that's something that is very inspiring, and that UN and governments on all levels could learn from. I wonder also if we could, now Helena is joining us, but I think I will ask one more question in order for her to settle in before I give her the floor. We have talked a lot about the success story that this work and this board has been in Stockholm, but I wonder also if we could say something about what are the biggest challenges and obstacles that Stockholm needs to overcome in order to reach the 2030 goals? What are the biggest issues and problems? And I wondered if Katarina could say something about that.
Well, I think we have a lot of obstacles. If I should start with my own area, since I'm the Vice Mayor for Climate and Environment, I started by saying that Stockholm always has been very good in those different areas, but we have a huge problem in the consumption pattern that we see in Stockholm, that the way we consume and buy things and use things and throw away things create a lot of environmental problems all over the world. Even if we in Stockholm is decreasing our emissions of CO2 and our footprint in the city, then we increase our footprint all over the world. So I think that is one major thing we really have to work on. Then, of course, the collaboration. It has been shown quite clear now when the board has been working that we are not great in collaborating with NGOs and civil society and different companies, and we have to be much better in collaborating, and that goes in the same way inside our own organization, but not least while communicating with our citizens. So I think we have great challenges in many of the different areas. Then I think we have a very good way forward now. I think we're going in the right direction, but there are a lot of things to do still to reach the 2030 goals, also in Stockholm.
Thank you, Katarina. And of course, those obstacles that you are describing, they can also be analyzed from a gender equality perspective. For example, patterns of consumptions where there are big difference between men and women that we could learn from. So I think that I want to welcome Helena Klintström, our fourth speaker. And as you can hear, Helena, we have already started a little bit of the discussion, but we are gonna make room now for your presentation. And you are leading the work on urban sustainability at the private company WSP. And you are also member of the advisory board of Stockholm's work with the 2030 agenda. And throughout your career working with urban planning, sustainability, but also gender equality has always been key issues for you. So I wondered if you could tell us just a little bit about that, and mainly how urban planning can be used as a tool to implement the 2030 agenda locally. So please go ahead and welcome again.
Thank you so much for having me. So yes, my name is Helena Klintström and I work with WSP. And I'm here as a member of this board, mostly as an expert, an expert on urban sustainability and gender equality. And urban development is a very important part of the development towards a more sustainable future. And I would like to say that because urban development can be seen as the physical form of our priorities as a society. And if you cement the wrong structures with your urban development, if you create cities where people are forced to create emissions to go to work, or cities where people of different socioeconomic status live far away from each other, then that pattern is really hard to break. And those structures really influence people's lives and the environmental sustainability of these cities. So my favorite sustainability goal is, of course, then number 11 with sustainable cities and communities, because it entails targets of so many of these structural areas that we need to work with and that affects our lives, such as housing, transportation, access to green space, and of course, reduced environmental impact. And regarding some of these, as we just heard, Stockholm is doing very good. We have a safe and accessible public transport system that is constantly developing. And as Katarina said, we have a lower environmental impact within the city, not talking about consumption, than many cities, even though we still have a road to travel in those areas. Like maybe in the middle regarding those goals, we have many beautiful parks and green space in Stockholm, and this sets us apart from different cities. But when the city densifies, there's a risk that green space is lost, and also the green space per person drops. In regards to other targets in the SDG 11, we have a harder time. For example, creating affordable housing is tricky in many bigger cities, and also many bigger cities in Sweden, and Stockholm is definitely no exception in regards to this. Also linked to this, segregation is a big obstacle in Stockholm. And although some is done in regards to urban planning to lessen segregation, the trend is still rising, and the pandemic widened the gap regarding many factors. But if we look at all the sustainability goals in Sweden, the goal regarding reduced inequality is the goal where we are both falling behind at an EU level, and where we're also moving away from obtaining this goal, as well as we were talking about before, sustainable consumption, where we are behind at an EU level. But urban planning and urban development can definitely play a role in turning those trends, because they affect other goals in a big way. And they are a big investment in time and money, however you choose to count. They play a role in affecting, for example, health and well-being, and definitely when it comes to health inequality, because where you live in a city affects how long you live. It affects who experiences noise from bigger roads or air pollution, who has access to green space, and who has the opportunity of an easy, safe commute to work. With this being said, I'm very happy to be part of this board, and I hope to continue to push and to help the municipality in the direction of a safer, more resilient and inclusive urban development, a safer, more resilient and inclusive Stockholm. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena. I wondered if you could say something also about how gender equality and women's and girls' perspectives can be mainstream into urban planning.
Yes, definitely. Well, there is a lot we can do in urban planning to further girls and women's safety, security, but also their feeling of ease, very much in the public realm. We are affected both on a structural level, where if it's easy to walk, if it's through nice environments, we are more likely to be healthy, which is a big part of the social sustainability and well-being, but also orientability, like how easy it is to find your way in the environment. If we know what we're expecting behind the next corner, those are things in the like small architectural scale that also affects how safe and secure we are. And we have quite a difference in how we look at urban planning and safety and security if we look at the Nordic countries and if we look at the North American countries, where North American countries tend to focus more on the security, where you look at how basically it's more about monitoring sometimes and more about how only people that are supposed to be in an area should be in an area. Whereas in Sweden, we are more focused on the safety part of urban planning, where we look at, American scholars such as Jane Jacobs and the ways of thinking about urban planning, where we feel more secure when we are amongst people, when we know that we are not alone if something happens to us, that we can easily call out for help and such. So that is actually like girls and women's safety and security, and the different ways of viewing this in North America and in the Nordic countries has actually really affected how we plan our cities and how the architecture is drawn out.
Thank you so much for that, Helena. So before you came in, we were actually talking about what are the biggest challenges or obstacles that Stockholm face in order to reach the 2030 agenda goals. And you also mentioned that in your presentation, so that was excellent. I wanted also to ask Gertrud and Gustav if they want to point out what major challenges or obstacles that they see. And I think that we can begin with Gertrud.
Thank you. Well, I agree with what has been said before by Helena and Katarina and Gustav, but I think the biggest and the most common challenge is that the society is in a transformation. The transformation is ongoing. And as Helena pointed out, transformation can solve problems or it can create problems. So it's doing risk analysis, as the CSW 66 this year is about, is a major challenge. And to follow what is happening and why it is happening and doing it as quickly as you can. And of course, the best thing is to be proactive. And we know, as Helena said, that there are indicators going in the wrong direction. So what can we do about it? We know, for instance, that life expectancy for women with a lower degree of education, it's going down. It's new for us. Agenda 2030 and gender equality will never be achieved if this kind of gaps are growing. So understanding, measuring, and discussing widely this transformation and what to do about gaps, I think that is our common and most important challenge. And I also want to add that before this session in the CSW, we discussed a lot, as you said, Clara, about the shrinking space for civil society and the deterioration of women's human rights in many, many, many places. So I think that is another example of a transformation that is going more and more to be undemocratic, perhaps even being afraid of what civil society organizations might do if they have an idea, because it's our lives that are transformed. It is our choices, our life situation. This is what will be transformed, and therefore it is a challenge to for all societies to bring us in this discussion.
Thank you, Gertrud. And then I would like to turn to Gustav to also ask you if you want to point out what you see as the biggest problems on the horizon.
I agree with very much, Rosetta, especially much of the interesting presentation by Helena. Thank you very much for that. And I could, of course, answer by discussing the reason why you set up an advisory board, the problem with silos and the lack of a holistic way that we have in an organization as Stockholm. But I think that the most acute answer is the lack of actually understanding how very quick the transformation that Helena had in her presentation is now actually happening. And I think that in Sweden we have an alliteration. In Swedish we have an alliteration that would answer your question. But the big challenge is krig, covid och klimat. That would in English be war, the pandemic, and the climate or environmental crisis. And that is now the reason why we're not sure that we actually will see the global positive development that we have seen for so many years when it comes to fighting poverty and so on. And that is, of course, also the situation in Sweden. The pandemic has really deepened the gap between rich and poor, also in Sweden. And it has in many ways made the situation worse for the Stockholm inhabitants that were worse off from the beginning. And now we have the terrible war, as Katarina started by mentioning, in Europe, that is affecting Sweden, both economically, of course, but also in a way that is not really discussed yet. We have 2,000 kids arriving to Sweden each day for the last week that should get places in school, that should get a way of continuing their life, even though it was disrupted by this illegal war. And I'm a big believer, which is not a belief in any other sense than an insight of the empirical fact that migration is at the end a good thing. But forced migration is, of course, terrible both for the person that migrates and if not handled correctly, it can become problematic also for societies that don't really see what you need to do to make sure that you become a new temporary or permanent home for new citizens. And when tackling the COVID crisis, many of the old fiscal rules were overturned, and you actually saw that this is a situation where you need to make sure that the necessary resources is there to actually handling the situation. And you need to have the same insight, both of course in climate and environmental issues, but also now when our cities and our countries will temporarily or permanently grow with new inhabitants. And if you don't have that will become a very big problem, and that will deepen the gaps even more. So I will say that the answer to the question, will we have a continuously global positive development, is the same answer to your question, what is the challenge for the city of Stockholm? we need to make sure that we, in a good way, tackle the very big changes and very rapid changes in the society as a whole.
Thank you so much for that, Gustav. So I think that time has come for us to start to wrap up this event. So we are running out of time. I want to finish by coming back to gender equality and women's and girls' rights, since we are doing this event as part of the Commission on the Status of Women. And all of those, I think all of those three very acute crisis that Gustav brought up. So the COVID pandemic, climate change, and also the war in Europe, but also in other parts of the world, for example, Afghanistan and Yemen and so on. All of those three crises needs to be understood from a gender equality and women's rights perspective. So the COVID pandemic has had different kind of impact on women and men, and especially looking at the economic consequences of the pandemic, we can see that it has also deepened the economic differences between women and men, and that many of the packages and programs that has been put forward both on the national and European level has benefited men and men's businesses and corporations more than women's. When it comes to climate change, you all know, and we've been talking about this already, the importance to also look at that from a gendered perspective and to see the different carbon footprint from men and women, and to analyze, for example, as Katarina mentioned, consumption patterns between men and women and what we can learn from that, and to also see that the destruction of the environment and the rapid climate change is also underpinned by patriarchal and masculine ideas and norms and behaviors. So that is also important to understand. And the same could be said about the war, that it's also driven by those very patriarchal and conservative and stereotypically male ideas, and that women and men are affected differently by the war. And also looking at migration, there is a big difference. So in this war in Ukraine right now, it's mainly women and children that are fleeing from the war. And we also need to understand that in order to give them the help and the support that they need. So I really want to end on the same note that we began, by reminding all of us that are in the panel and everyone that's listening to have those the gender equality understanding and analysis of all those problems that are arising. So I want to thank all of you that have been listening and following this event, and also to our excellent speakers, Katarina, Gertrud, Gustav, and Helena. And we are recording this event, so it will also be available afterwards. And I know that in the chat, someone requested the link to the sustainability report that was discussed. So it has also been posted in the chat for further reading. So thank you so much for today. And I wish everyone a good day, and hope that you will enjoy the rest of CSW. Thank you.